Ciao everyone, this is Nate on the Stone. Welcome back to my channel, and as you can probably see, our environment has changed just a little bit from our usual decorum. Perfectly deliberate. We had to go underground for this episode because Russian Sith Lords might be listening in. You never know where they might be. Yes, in a world filled with the Chinese manipulating our hardware so that they could conduct long-term spying on our banking and defense systems, in a world that sees mob rule becoming the norm instead of the exception, time had to be taken out because one of the big mysteries of the 21st century had finally been solved. Why did Star Wars: The Last Jedi underperform by almost $200 million? Well, if you had taken the rounds on the internet last week, and I'm sure you had, you would have seen that the answer was Russian spies, trolls, and bots. What set this particular line of dominoes falling was a paper published by Dr. Mortan Bay of the University of Southern California entitled "Enabling the Haters: The Last Jedi and the Manipulation of Pop Culture Through Social Media Manipulation." And everybody started losing their minds. Over at The Verge, the story read that Dr. Bay had found something alarming. More than half the people sending angry tweets to director Rian Johnson were bots, trolls, or activists, using The Last Jedi to propagate political messages supporting extreme right-wing causes. Even worse, a number of these users appear to be Russian trolls. The UK Guardian ran a headline, "After Russian trolls tarnish The Last Jedi, is it safe to like Star Wars again?" IndieWire loudly proclaimed, "Star Wars: The Last Jedi Backlash. Academic study reveals 50% of online hate caused by Russian trolls or non-humans." Now those are just 3 examples, but that's enough to probably give you a taste of what the storyline was. 50% of all the angry tweets sent to director Rian Johnson about The Last Jedi was manipulation sent by Russian trolls and bots deliberately to divide our country through pop culture. In all honesty, it's actually a really interesting idea and should probably be made into a Bond movie or a Mission Impossible movie somewhere along the line. Except that that's not exactly what Dr. Bay's study found. Oh, don't get me wrong. He did find that 50% of the hate sent to Rian Johnson was probably caused by Russian bots and/or trolls. But when you actually read his study, it's not as threatening or as glamorous or as exciting as the headlines would make you believe. Now, it is true that the purpose of the study was to present evidence to suggest that political manipulation via social media was no longer limited to specific political debate, but that it had spread to the area of pop culture. And in order to do that, he looked at tweets that were sent directly to director Rian Johnson in the 7-month period after the release of The Last Jedi in December of 2016. Now let's break this down. Bay gathered 1,273 tweets that were sent to Rian Johnson and Rian Johnson alone. After discarding some tweets, for example, tweets sent by the same user, because the purpose of the study was to determine political leanings of the Twitter users and not how often they tweeted, he was left with 967 tweets. Of those 967 tweets, he found that 206 of them were negative. He then took those 206 negative tweets and divided them into 3 categories: political agenda, troll, sock puppet, bot, or fantagonist. He found that 50% of those 206 negative tweets, so about 103, were caused by political agenda or sock puppet bot. So already out of 967 tweets, only 103 of those were caused specifically by political agenda or by some sort of non-human, a sock puppet or a bot. Now here is where it gets really interesting. Of those 206 negative tweets, Bay was only able to say that 11 of them came from bots. Furthermore, only 33 of those 206 negative tweets came from a sock puppet or a troll. And of those 33, only 16 could be classified as probably coming from a Russian troll or a Russian sock puppet. So for all the hand-wringing and hair-pulling about how the Russians were manipulating views of The Last Jedi by sending out negative tweets, in reality, it comes down to 16 users. 16 users. That's it. I can't help but feel sorry for some of these people. Reading these articles, it feels like that they grasped onto this study as their lifeboat, that they were justified, that The Last Jedi was actually a really good movie, and that all the people who said that it was boring and that it wasn't Star Wars, well, they had just been manipulated by evil Russians, and that really, if you took the Russians out of the equation, everyone would come together and say that Episode 8 was Star Wars, that it was great, it was good, it continued the story, and that everyone would finally love it. But at the end of the day, you cannot explain the steep divergence between professional critics who generally liked it and normal viewers who seem to dislike it. You can't say that that was all caused by 16 Russian trolls. And you can't say that 16 Russian trolls caused one of the most hyped movies of all time to underperform by almost $200 million. So why did The Last Jedi underperform? And why have so many people expressed dislike or even out-and-out hatred for the movie? Well, maybe the answer isn't all that mysterious after all. Maybe it all comes down to story. In his study, Bay says that Star Wars has always leaned to the political left, and so that the people who complained that The Last Jedi took a sharp left turn shouldn't be surprised, and they have no reason to complain. The Last Jedi was just doing what Star Wars has always done. And I'm not going to argue with that, although I will say that as a fan of the original trilogy, I can't think of anything in any of those movies that is overtly left-leaning. If there are left-leaning messages in them, they're done pretty subtly, and I'm so wrapped up in spaceships fighting each other and space wizards dueling each other with laser swords that it passes under my radar every single time. Compare that to the prequels, which, yeah, took a different tact altogether.
If you're not with me, then you're my enemy. Only a Sith deals in absolutes.
I wonder who he could be referring to. George W. Bush. Whether there are subtle left-leaning messages in the original trilogy, I don't think that that's as important as what Star Wars meant to everybody when it originally came out. We have to remember that when Star Wars, the very first one, it's not A New Hope, it's just Star Wars, was released in May of 1977, things were not going so well in the United States. You had Vietnam, you had Nixon, you had the rationing under Carter, and you had a general sense of defeat, cynicism, and soft nihilism. But into all of this, suddenly, with Star Wars, you got something completely different. All of a sudden, you had a movie with a very simple plot. Good versus evil. The good guys were good, the bad guys were bad, and the good guys defeated the bad guys at the end of every movie, in some form or fashion. It didn't matter that the movies are goofy as heck if you really sit down to think about it. It doesn't matter that they're really not all that original. George Lucas himself will admit that. None of that matters. What matters, and what mattered especially starting in 1977, was that Star Wars tapped into that innate human desire to see good defeat evil. It tapped into that need to believe that good could defeat evil. And that ultimately is the importance of stories, why stories are so important. There's a quote by the English author C.S. Lewis that I'm particularly fond of, and it goes like this: "Reason is the natural organ of truth, but imagination is the organ of understanding." And what Lewis meant by that was that, yeah, you can understand something, or you can see something with your reasoning. You can follow a logical syllogism and, yeah, say, of course, the conclusion follows from the premises. But to understand something and to really accept it into your whole self, it can't just be your mind going through premises to reach an inevitable logical conclusion. The imagination, the heart, as it were, has to be engaged as well. And that's what stories do. So that's the first thing that stories do. They allow us to incorporate a moral or a lesson into our very beings, not just in our heads, but in our hearts as well. It's kind of like what another English author, G.K. Chesterton, said about the importance of stories. Chesterton said that stories don't put images of evil or ugliness in someone's head, because evil and ugliness are just out there, part of the world. But what stories do is it gives us the idea and the hope that good can triumph over evil and ugliness. Kind of like Star Wars. And from that hope, from that inspiration, comes the second important thing about stories, and that is they inspire us. That's why Luke Skywalker has become such an icon in our pop mythology. He was the orphan farm boy, the nobody who had nothing, who through sacrifice, dedication, and believing in good became a Jedi Knight. And so not only the man who toppled over the Galactic Empire, but the man who saved his father's soul. And I think at the end of the day, that's why The Last Jedi underperformed. That's why people were upset with it. Because The Last Jedi took the story of good triumphing over evil. It took the story of heroes that we've grown up with, and it turned it all upside down. Maybe instead of blaming Russian spies and Russian bots and Russian trolls and Russian yaks and Russian vodka about a movie not doing well, maybe it's time to realize that even today, perhaps especially today, in a world that seems to be getting crazier and crazier every day, where institutions and customs that we've always clung to and which we thought would always be there for us are being attacked and are crumbling, maybe we need to realize that people, especially in those times, need their heroes. They need people that they can look up to. They need that example of good triumphing over evil. And when those are taken away from them, we shouldn't be surprised when they write negative reviews of a movie. But as usual, what say you? Are stories necessary to inspire us, to give us that hope that good can triumph over evil, that we can be heroes? Or are stories just fluff entertainment, and it doesn't matter whether it's optimistic or cynical, as long as we get a kick out of it? As always, let me know what you all think down in the comments below. Well, that about wraps it up for right now, gang. Don't worry, next week we will be in our usual location And until then, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring that bell for notifications so you don't have to rely on the Force to tell you whenever I post a new video every Tuesday. As always, thank you for watching, and I will see you all again next week on Top of the Stone. Ciao.